Hey, John Ty here, and welcome to the Self Publishing Summit. Our guest today is a true book marketing expert and is the author of 1001 Ways to Market Your Books. He's mentored authors who, between them, have sold over 1 billion books. That's billion with a B. He's also the founder of the Billion Book Initiative to help the next generation of book authors to sell another billion books. So he's a perfect guest for the summit. Our guest today, John Kremer. John, welcome to the Self Publishing Summit.
Welcome, John. Thank you.
Great to have you on. Yeah, we tried to hook up last week, but we had some scheduling problems. So we got there eventually. So that's great. So great to have you on because I've known about you for a long time, but this is the first time we've actually chatted. So tell us before we get into the there's all sorts of stuff to cover, but just tell us a little bit about your background, how you became you're a guru, for want of a better word, within the book marketing industry. You're very well known. Tell us how you got into that in the first place.
Well, as many of the people that are probably listening in, I was a frustrated author waiting for a publisher to say yes, and I finally just decided I would self-publish.
Yeah.
Now, at the time, I was doing marketing for a friend of mine in the gift and toy industry, so I knew a lot about marketing. And actually, my first book, though, was the directory of book printers, because I often publish books that I need or I want to see happen. So I created the directory of book publishers, printers, because I needed printers. And the literary marketplace, which was the only source of book printers, was very inadequate. They were talking about short runs when they were talking about 10,000 copies, and I didn't want to do 10,000 copies. And so I created a directory that actually made sense. Now that's free online on my website at bookmarketingbestsellers.com. So, that is no longer a book format because directories don't make sense as books anymore for the most part.
Yeah.
And then, I did that book and people kept saying, okay, well, I don't know, I've got all these books, they're in my garage, how do I get them out of the garage? And I said, well, I know a lot of ways to market your books. And so my first book was, my next book was 101 Ways to Market Your Books, which now is 1,001 ways to market your books.
Yeah. Yeah. And when did that first book come? When it was 101 Ways, when did that come out?
1986.
Okay, so that's gosh,
You
29
thought I wouldn't know the date.
Should I keep you on your toes there? That's great. So, okay, very interesting that it's gone from 101 ways to 1,001 ways. So,
well, people said I lied in the first edition, so I decided to tell the truth and say it was 1,001. I haven't actually counted them, so I don't really know how many ways there are, but I'm pretty sure there's at least 1,000.
Yeah, I'm sure people
my
are going
friend.
to be.
Well, I have a friend, Greg Godek, that self-published 1,001 Ways to Be Romantic, and he actually numbered them. And maybe I should follow his advice because it was a lot shorter book.
You might have more than 1,000. Good. So, what's interesting for me is that I've like you, I started out as a frustrated author. I wrote my first book, which is a novel. It was a thriller back in '98 was when I started writing that. Couldn't get an agent. I wrote my second book, which was a nonfiction book, in 2004. Same thing. Couldn't get an agent. And it wasn't until 2012 that I discovered Kindle Direct Publishing, and that sort of opened up a whole new world for me. And so I've been really getting into that. And the just a little bit of relevant backstory is that I became an entrepreneur. I was a corporate lawyer before, but I became an entrepreneur in beginning of 2009. So as part of that process, I started learning about marketing, specifically online marketing. So I was really getting into the marketing, finding that very fascinating first, and then discovered the Kindle Direct Publishing in 2012 and thought, well, actually I can get that stuff out and maybe I can have these other ideas. I could actually bring them to fruition because there's no gatekeeper standing between me and the publishing house and all that sort of stuff. So, so I've been learning about that and building on that the last few years, but you've been doing this since 1986. So I'd be really excuse me, I would be really interested to hear your perspective on, you know, we were talking about just before we came in here about the state of the industry, but you know, we've got pure self-publishing, say going out, for example, and through Kindle, direct publishing. We've got the traditional publishing, and we've got sort of, well, mid-tier publishing or partnership publishing. You know, people have different names for it, and so there's that gray area in between. I'd
Right.
be interested to hear, you know, what your thoughts are, especially in terms of, you know, the pros and cons of the different ways of getting your book out there. And obviously, we'll talk about the marketing later, but it'd just be great to get that perspective.
Well, I mean, you begin with self-publishing and you've got options because you can do ebooks, you can do printed books, you can do print on demand. When I started off, you only had one option. You paid for printing a certain number of copies. And generally speaking, that meant at least 1,000 because of the
Mm,
cost of printing. But nowadays, with Kindle and other ebook formats and print on demand, there are hardly any barriers to doing self-publishing like there were in terms of having to spend money.
yeah.
Um, and now, I mean, with Kindle, it's completely free if you can format your book properly. And even
Yeah.
print on demand is low cost or free in some cases. The one thing I tell people is if you're going to do print on demand, don't buy their marketing packages
Hmm.
because almost every print on demand publisher out there has terrible marketing packages. So just don't do it. You can do a better job on your own or by hiring a good virtual assistant, and you'll be much better off. Major publishing has been consolidating and consolidating and consolidating since I started. There used
Mm,
to be like 12 major publishers, and now I think there's 6. And the sad thing is that every time a publisher buys a publisher, that publisher disappears. And it's just so sad to see really good publishers essentially go by the wayside. So I hate to see that, but I understand
mm.
why, a good small publisher will sell out to a big publisher. I mean, I had a friend sell out for $60 million. I think it was worth it for him.
Yeah.
Uh, you know,
You see why I might be tempted.
I would be tempted too if anybody wanted to throw cash at me. Um, and so I can understand why he did. And I had another friend that sold out. And then, after his non-compete clause, he started a new publishing company. And
Mm,
so, there are lots of options out there. The big publishers, for the most part, are just stupid. I can't say it any other way.
yeah.
They really only know one or two ways to market books. I don't think any of them have read 1,001 Ways to Market Your Books.
Mm.
Or if they, somebody in their ranks did, they probably got fired for being too creative. Uh,
Heretical.
you know, yeah. And there's some wonderful mid-sized publishers out there. People like Hay House and
Mm,
Amber Allen and I'm just going blank in the others. Source Books, that are great publishers. And if I were going to choose, those would be the publishers I would want today if I was going to
mm.
let somebody else publish me. Because a
Yeah.
good mid-sized publisher that's had a bestseller under their, they've done at least one bestseller, that's a good company to go with, especially if they love your book. I mean, if they're
Mm,
lukewarm about your book, you don't sell the rights to anybody.
yeah.
If they're not throwing cash at you or
Mm,
throwing love at you or something like that, you don't sign with them because it's
yeah.
so easy today to self-publish. And if you're going to have to do the marketing anyway, that makes a difference. Now, the
Yeah.
one key thing is, um, most of the established publishers have bookstore distribution that you can't match as a self-publisher. You just can't. And that's
Mm,
the main reason you would go with a publisher is for that bookstore distribution.
mm.
And if your book needed bookstore distribution, that would be important. But, in today's world where I don't know what it is now, probably 25% of all book sales are online. It may be higher than that now. Um, you can start to compete.
Yeah.
Back in the day in 1994, I think it was, when the internet was starting to become valid, um, I used to give away those AOL discs just to get people online, because the internet opened up the world to us as self-publishers in a way that we could never do before then. And so I wanted to get authors online just to have that international exposure. Back in the day, that was important. Nowadays, of
Mm.
course, it gives you exposure to every little nook and cranny in the world.
Yeah.
Um, with, there's something like I think it's 5.5 billion people with smartphones now in the world. A lot of people have access to the internet that did not have access before, and that's only
Yeah.
going to increase. I saw a stat the other day that said that there were going to be 26 billion mobile devices by
Mm.
2020, and that
Yeah.
mean that means
So
like 3 mobile devices per person.
yeah,
That's a
that's
lot.
that's a very powerful sort of market penetration, isn't it? In terms of basically almost everybody's going to be able to go online and get your
Yeah.
stuff. And you mentioned, I mean, I love the point you made about don't go with somebody who's lukewarm. I mean, I think that's because if you want to get in, and you mentioned also the publisher's going to give you bookstore distribution, so if that's an important part of your strategy, that might be a reason to go with, say, a mid-tier publisher. But as as an author wanting to get published, wanting to get a publisher, there's a temptation, I guess, isn't there, to want to sign up with anyone that offers to sign you. But if they are lukewarm, as you say, probably better off doing things yourself, or keep going until you find someone who's really gonna, your stuff is gonna resonate with them and they can be enthusiastic about it. And I mean, apart from
Well,
things
that
like
means, John, that also
yeah,
means you don't self-publish if you're lukewarm. If you don't love your book,
mm,
self-publishing is not going to help you, because
yeah,
you won't spend the time to market that book and get it out there into the real world. So you have to be passionate also. You have to really love your book. And if you
absolutely,
don't, if you're not passionate about your book, find somebody who is and hire them.
yeah. Yeah, and I mean, and that's a great point as well. And obviously, that ties into the 1,001 ways to market your book, because you're not going to work through 1,000 ways, or let alone 100 ways, so let alone 1,000. If you're not enthusiastic, you're going to run out of steam pretty quickly.
Well,
Um,
the thing is, you don't do 1,001 ways. I always
no.
tell people, pick 5 to 7 ways that you want to spend time on, that you like doing, that you have the money to do, you have the time to do, you have the passion to do. It fits your skill set, and do
Hmm.
those 5 to 7 ways. And if one of them doesn't work, add another one. But
Hmm.
focus, because if you don't focus, if you get all scattershot, I mean, I see authors that jump on every new bandwagon that's out there on internet marketing, and what happens? They do nothing well.
Mm.
But if you focus, you can learn how to do something really well, and then you can do it.
Good. Okay. Well, we'll come back to that in a second, because again,
Okay.
that's critical. Just before we do that, you mentioned, as I say, you mentioned bookstore distribution. Any other sort of major pros and cons for anybody who's listening and thinking, I don't want to, maybe I want to self-publish, maybe I want to go with a mid-tier publisher. Any other, any other sort of major considerations that they should think about?
Well, one of the key things is time to get the book out.
Hmm.
If you sell to a small, mid-sized publisher or large publisher, it's going to take them a year to get the book out. And quite honestly, I'm not that patient. So one of the reasons I self-publish is that I want to get the book out right away. Uh,
Hmm.
I want it to be like a hot potato that, gets out there and has to be out there right away. So I
Yeah.
like self-publishing for that reason. I also like self-publishing because you have full control. That's both good and bad, because I've seen people have full control and put out a book that isn't well edited, isn't well designed, and so on. So, I mean, there are reasons why you don't want full control if you don't have good judgment. But if you
That's a
do,
very
and
polite
you
way of
hire,
putting it.
and if you don't hire, you need to hire some people, a good cover designer, You know, and again, you can get them cheap nowadays on
Mm,
Fiverr.com and things like that. I mean, I've
yeah,
seen people with some really great covers come for $5 on Fiverr.
yeah, yeah.
You don't always get it, and you still have to use your judgment to have a good cover. But
Hmm.
and then you do have to have your book well edited in the inside. I've seen so many junky self-published books look terrible on the inside because of there wasn't any judgment. And that, you know, designing a
Mm,
book from the inside is should be so easy because all you have to do is find a book that you like that's well designed and tell your designer or do it yourself, mimic it. There's no
yeah.
copyright on design
No,
in terms of book design. So,
yeah.
you know, hire somebody that knows how to do it well.
Yeah. And like you say, there's some great things. I just want to say that this logo behind me, Self-Publishing Summit 2015. So I've used 99 designs, which is good, but it's getting more expensive and
Yeah,
you don't get as many designs coming through unless you go for the higher end packages. So what I did for this, I did something I'd not done before, and I used Fiverr, but because Fiverr is so cheap, and if you haven't used Fiverr, it's fiverr.com, and it's literally, you know, $5 for the basic gig. And so I think I went out to about eight or nine different designers who had logos that I kind of like the look of those logos. And I said,
right,
here's the brief, gave the same one. So it cost me $45 to get 9 logos through, 9 ideas back. And then
right,
I took the one that I did a little competition, had people, and then had the best one worked up and had some tweaks done. It cost me a few extra dollars to do that, but the
right.
whole thing was, oh gosh, maybe it cost me $75 all in, something like that, which is actually a lot cheaper than 99 designs.
Right.
And so
That's a nice thing about Fiverr is you can always, if you find somebody good, you can pay them extra to do the tweaks, to do the you know, fixes or to upgrade what they've done for you.
yeah, it's
So
very powerful. And there's other sites. I mean, obviously you can do, you know, you mentioned editing and there's proofreading and different types of editing. You can get that done on Fiverr. There's also sites like Odesk is a site that I use, and people
yeah,
will do the formatting, the editing, the proofreading, all the good stuff. So that, because I mean, we know this, I'm sure, you know, if you're listening and you've written anything, you know that you'll never pick up all your own mistakes. Particularly, you know what it's supposed to say, and your brain reads it the way you meant to write it, even if there are mistakes in there. So, all
my
the more reason
first
to get an
my
editor.
first 101 ways to market your books had like 20 of the same mistake because I didn't see it, and the
Yeah.
people that were working for me did not see it because I did have them proofread it. I did have other eyes, but they weren't good enough eyes. And
Mm.
so I would start a sentence, there is, and then switch it to a plural, you know, whatever the object. And suddenly it didn't make sense. It should have been there are, but you know, so my
Yeah.
thought process was there is, and then boom, I change it and I don't change the beginning again.
Yeah.
So I had that same mistake like 20 times in the book. And so since then, I always double check for there is and there are,
Mm.
doing a global, you know, search just to make sure I didn't make the mistake again.
Yeah. And I mean, and you mentioned it's not expensive to get that done, especially the
Right.
proofreading, which I think is essential, and it can make such a huge difference to the way the book is received. And you know, I'm sure I, what I've found is that, you know, if there's a badly formatted or badly edited book on Amazon, you'll see people write bad reviews about that book just on the basis of that, and you know
Right.
that's going to have an impact on the sales. And the studies that show that a negative review on Amazon has like it's like 5 or 10 times the impact of a positive review, because most of the reviews are positive, so a negative review really kind of stands out. Um,
Right. One of the key things that I found is that many authors will get their book edited, but then they write their own promotional copy and they don't get that edited. And as a you know, a media person, I look at that news release and I'm going, well, the book can't be good because the news release is riddled with grammatical errors, misspellings, whatever. And I'm going,
yeah,
okay, because I'm going to judge the quality of the book based on the quality of the news release or the promotional copy. And if there's any mistakes in there, I'm not going to ask for the
Mm.
book, because I'm not going to want to read a book that's riddled with errors, even though it may not be. The same is
Yeah.
true is if the news release is boring, I'm going to go, well, the book will be boring. Your news release has to reflect the quality of your book. And
Mm.
that means you really do have to spend some time making sure it's a good news release, because we judge, all media people do, and they're
Mm.
looking for reasons to throw away your promotional copy, your news release, whatever, because they're busy and they only have so much time and so much space to promote things. They're not
Yeah.
going to take anything that's riddled with errors in any way or is boring.
Yeah, and that's critical, isn't it? And another really good point. And you could say the same thing about the descriptive copy, excuse me, from the point of view of your prospective buyer. So,
Yeah,
if that's boring, if it doesn't convey what the book's about, if it's got mistakes in, if it's complicated and doesn't make sense, any of those things are gonna be like a red flag, at least at a subconscious level, and
right.
and harm your book sales. And obviously, you get a bad press release, and nobody's going to push it out for you, which is so. Yeah, really good point. And I was going to just pick up on something, because I've got a podcast which is nothing to do with the summit, but a lot of the people on the podcast are authors. And about I guess a couple of months ago now, I had Jack Canfield on, which was a great honor. And he mentioned you, and he mentioned 1,001 Ways to Market Your Book as
Cool.
being instrumental in the success of his Chicken Soup for the Soul book series. And I kind of got the impression he probably did do all 1,000 things, because he said they were working through that, just basically working on things from your book for
Well,
pretty
they
much
put a
8
lot
years.
of the things up on the wall. It was
Yeah, that's right.
sticky notes, and then as they did them, they took it off the wall. So, yeah,
Yeah,
they did use it in a very crucial way. Now, I would not recommend that you do all those things that they did.
yeah.
They found some things that worked the best, and they
Mm,
then did a lot of those. One thing that worked for them, that doesn't necessarily work for all authors, was radio interviews.
mm,
And so they were doing 2 or 3 radio interviews every day when they started out. Now they don't. Now they look for TV interviews because they're better known. But they still do radio interviews on a regular basis, and I think that's really neat.
yeah. Well, that takes us back to that point you made earlier, which is to be focused. And Jack Canfield and Mark Victor Hansen, they might be sort of the exception to the rule, in that they did so many things over a long period of time. But you mentioned earlier, pick, I think, 5 to 7 things and focus on
Right.
those. And if something doesn't work, rotate that out and try something else. So, since we don't have time on this interview to do all 1,001 things, perhaps you could give us some of the things which, from the perspective of a self-published author, but again, I guess this applies to a traditionally published author, because most authors do most of their own marketing anyway. Some of the things that you find are really working well now for people and moving the needle.
Well, one of the key things is still speaking, getting out there and meeting your audience and speaking. Uh, you could almost every bestseller for the last 30 years in business, self-help, poetry, memoirs has happened because the author has gotten out there and done speaking engagements
Mm,
in bookstores, in unity churches, in businesses, wherever it might be, because that's a really key way to start to build the word of mouth. And word of
yeah.
mouth sells 80% of all books.
Okay.
People tell somebody else, I really love this book. You got to read it, and that's what sells books. And so, what your job as an author is to start that word of mouth going. Uh, it's your job to get enough people interested that the word of mouth starts to happen. That's one reason that giving away, with Kindle, doing the Kindle Select program and giving books away is
Mm,
actually a good strategy because it gets word of mouth going. Your
mm,
job in doing that is to make sure that there's some sort of response mechanism or encouragement mechanism in your book that tells people, hey, I want you to talk about it. I want you to tell other people. I want you to encourage them to, do whatever. Because some people will read a good book and not think about telling other
Mm.
people, but if you ask them, they'll do it.
Yeah. That's like having a referral strategy in your business, isn't it? You know, you'll
Right.
get referrals anyway if you do a good job, but you'll get a lot more if you actually have a system in place to
Right.
solicit those. Yeah.
Well, there's a really one of the articles, blog posts on bookmarketingbestsellers.com is 51 things that readers can do to help the authors that they love.
Mm.
And so I encourage all authors to share that with their readers and say, hey, if you're stuck for a way to help me, here are 51 ways.
Yeah.
I think it's still 51 ways. I may have added some. I keep adding to some. When I have a good blog post, I'll continue to add to it. And
Yeah.
I know it started off it's 36 ways, and I think it's 51 now.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, and if you've got I mean, one of the authors we had on earlier in the summit was Nick Stevenson. He talks about how to get your first 10,000 readers and build that
Right.
email list of fans. And that would be to combine, your 51 ideas with if you start building an email list and get that
Right.
relationship going, it might only be a small percentage, but some of those people will be your evangelists, won't they? And that can have a huge impact.
Well, it's interesting how that can happen. I mean, I have one image on Pinterest that's had over 1.4 million repins.
Wow.
And, that happens because there's some people with thousands and thousands and thousands of followers that liked it and repinned it.
Mm,
And their pin of my pin had over 5,000 repins. I actually looked and I started tracking some of the more popular repins of it. And just trying to figure out how many repins I got back when Pinterest had no statistics at all. And I found there were probably about 20 or 30 people that had over 1,000 repins, and probably 100 or more that had 100 repins or more of their pin of repin of my pin. And so
mm,
I was able to start to judge how many people had repinned it. And that's really, I mean, Pinterest is like word of mouth. And, if you can get that
mm.
happening in the real world, you can have incredible power. I remember back when I worked in an office in downtown St. Paul, Minnesota, every noon as I walked the streets or whatever, I would see secretary after secretary reading the same book. And
Yeah.
that's what word of mouth is. I mean, the secretaries is incredible word of mouth network.
Mm,
And you get one of those secretaries liking a book. I mean, they're going to tell more secretaries and they're going to tell more. And it's just
yeah.
amazing how quickly the word of mouth can fly in just one downtown. And when you
Yeah.
multiply that by 100 downtowns or 1,000 downtowns, you got some great power there.
Yeah, that's funny. It reminds me of a time this is when I used to work in London when I was a lawyer, and I used to have to commute to work every day on the tube.
Yes.
And it was after the Da Vinci Code came out, it was hugely successful. Like every other person on the tube was reading, and this was sort of kind of pre Kindle. I don't think Kindle was out at this point.
No, it
So
wasn't.
everybody was reading a copy of Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, or they'd got Angels and Demons, which was actually a prequel that became a
Right.
bestseller, as a result of that. Including me, I read the book as well. And you'd be sitting there, there'd be people either side of you with a Dan Brown book, and very funny how that and of course it gets the visibility in the charts, but it also gets the word of mouth and the social proof of seeing everybody else reading the books,
Right.
and very powerful stuff. So I mean, that's
And
great.
that's why the big publishers with their big books, they try to get really intensive market penetration in the first week or two. In fact, if
Mm,
they don't get it within the first 6 weeks, they drop the book. They don't do any more promotion. That's the big publishers model. So they have to
yeah,
get all that word of mouth going right away, or they drop a book. So your
and
job as
that's
an author is to, help the publisher make that happen, because um, they only do it for a few select books. So you really have to help.
mm, yeah. And that's an interesting point. There's a learning point there. Going back to Jack Canfield, and Jack was saying that it took them 18 months of effort, real effort to, I mean, it took them a lot of effort just to get a publisher in the first place. But after the book came out, it took 18 months then before it hit the New York Times bestseller list. So, if that had been a traditional publisher and they hadn't been doing their own marketing, and they'd have sort of forgotten about it after 6 weeks. Well, if Jack and Mark hadn't put the effort in, and if they hadn't been passionate about it to therefore put the effort in, touching back on what we were saying earlier, they wouldn't have then gone on to create 250 books in that series and sell over 500 million copies worldwide.
Right. I mean, that alone helped me get to my 1 billion books sold, since they took care of half of it. But
it's the 80-20 principle, isn't it?
And they've, from the beginning, they've always been very supportive of me, and they've sold a ton of books for me. And so I think of them as the generals in my word of mouth army, because their word of mouth has sold a lot of books for me, and they continue to. As you said, Jack talked about it just the other week, and that, to me is important, so I consider them incredibly good friends just because of that.
Well, he
but
actually,
I love them anyway, so it doesn't matter. Even if they didn't promote my book, I would love them. But it does help.
Yeah. And so as I say, Jack recommended your book. He recommended 1001 Ways to Market Your Books on the interview. So yeah.
One of the key things that I think authors should do is when they have the idea for the book, that's when you start marketing the book. You don't wait for the book to be written. You don't wait for the book to be printed, and you don't wait for it to be distributed. If you're not starting to market your book as you're writing it, as you have the idea for the book, that's when you need to start marketing. So many people come to me and they've already got their book printed, and now they go, now I have to market it. What should I do? And I'm saying, well, get a time machine, go back 6 months or a year, and then we can talk, but you can always recover. You can always do it later, but you'll find it's a lot easier because, as you said, one of the key things is you have to develop an email list, a customer relations with people that are potential buyers for your book. The sooner you do that, the better it is. I know one author that started podcasting his novel as he was writing it. By the time he got done writing the book, he had 80,000 people signed up to get his podcast news. And they were listening to every podcast, and they were hungry to buy the book. I mean, how many of you would like to have 80,000 people raise their hand and say, I got to have it now? And that's the really magic of marketing and building an audience ahead of time. They talk about it in internet marketing as building a tribe. And it's very much the same thing as me talking about you building a word of mouth army. You need to build something where there are people who are passionate for what you're doing, and they're ready to be a brand ambassador for you and really start to do something for you. And when they're hungry to do it, that's, so sometimes my mind goes ahead of my mouth. One of the things that is, if you're going to do one of those Kindle free days, make sure there's built into it some sort of structure to ask those people for reviews, ask them to blog about your book, ask them to share it with their friends on social networks. That should be part of the giveaway. You don't want to just do a giveaway so that you get higher ranked in Amazon. You want to give the giveaway so you start that word of mouth, and you got to help them think about that. So get the review, get them to share it on social networks, get them to blog about it. Anything like that can help drive a book up the sales rank, because you don't want to continue giving away your book free without getting something back. And you have to ask for it. You have to ask.
Very much, yeah. I mean, so I'm just looking. I've got all sorts of notes I'm taking here. There's lots of good things. I mean, you mentioned having a really tight press release, which people will respond to. Earlier, you talked about the importance of speaking. You mentioned radio, the KDP free giveaway, and we just talked about how to have calls to action for shares, reviews, getting word of mouth. you mentioned Pinterest. I mean, obviously great results there. Start marketing. Basically, once you have the idea, build relationships, build that email list, build that platform for when you're ready to launch.
Right.
So you mentioned your friend who podcasted his book. So just to get this clear, what he was doing, he was just putting a little bit of the book out, like excerpts from the book as he was going through writing the book. What was his strategy
Right.
there?
Well, his strategy was to build up his audience. If he thought he had a good novel, so he just started doing 5-minute podcasts, just enough to get people continuing to get interested in the story, and then build from there. I think he just read the book from start to finish. I don't think he was doing excerpts or things like that. He
Yeah.
was just building it up
So
as he
almost
went
like a
along.
mini series.
Yeah, I mean, and
Yeah.
and that's always a good way. I always tell novelists when they're in a bookstore and they're promoting their novel, the key thing to do is read. You don't start at the beginning in a bookstore because you only have a certain amount of time. So you pick a really exciting passage and you stop before the end of that passage when there's some slight completion of a storyline. You leave it hanging. You leave it cliffhanging, and the cliffhanger there, and then people want to go, well, what happened next? And
Yeah.
and you say, well, it's easy to find out. There are copies of the book for sale right over there by the register. But you have to do something like that in doing interviews too. You give people good, like if you have a nonfiction book, you give people some good tips. You don't keep telling people it's in the book, it's in the book, it's in the book. You actually share 3 to 5 tips uh, over the course of the interview so that people know that you have good, substantial knowledge and information, and they expect that the book will be that much better and give them even more. So they're going to want to buy the book because you've made them hungry. The worst thing you can do is be bland in your interview and not give away the secrets of your interview, of your book. You have to give away the secrets, even if you give them all away. Let's say you only have 3 secrets in your book. Give them away because people will still buy the book because they think there's more.
Yeah, it's that bit of psychology, isn't it? That people are thinking, yeah, at least subconsciously, if this is what he or she is giving away for free, what's in the
Right.
book? Plus, it builds
Yes.
reciprocity as well. People appreciate the fact that you're giving them good information, which they're presumably interested in that topic, or they wouldn't be listening to
Well,
you in the
it
first
makes
place.
the interview or the talk much more interesting, and it makes it much more. People feel like when they leave that it's something good. And the thing is that when somebody hears you speak, whether it's on an interview like here or a live interview, they're going to tell more people about your book because now you have more of a relationship with those people. Even if they haven't shaken your hand, like here, they can't, but they can. They've seen me, they know me, they like the way that I talk or the tips I've given. They're going to tell more people, hey, you got to get John Kramer's 1,001 Ways to Market Your Books.
Yeah,
And that's how you create word of mouth. You give good value. And the other thing that you need to do in interviews or in any talks that you do is tell stories. People
yeah,
love stories, and what they pass on is often the stories that you tell. If I gave you an abstract principle, a certain number of people will talk about it. But if I attach a story to the abstract principle, now it has more meaning, and that's really important. You know, Probably one of the most famous teachers ever was Jesus, and he always taught in parables. He had
yeah.
very, very few abstract talks. The Sermon on the Mount was probably one of them, but he probably, I can't remember now, but I think he included some stories even in that sermon. But he taught in parables, he taught in stories. And the key thing you need to do in learning to promote your book is to have 3 or 4 good stories you can share, and make sure that those stories aren't more than 2 to 5 sentences long. Ideally, they should be around 2 sentences. If you can tell a story in 2 sentences, you can sell books.
That's very interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And it's so true that, I'm just thinking, I've been to a number of Tony Robbins events, and he's tells a lot of stuff. And he told a story that, well, I told a number of stories, but, you remember the stories, and I'm thinking of an event that was 6 years ago that I went to, and all
Right.
sorts of lessons that stuck in my mind. But it's the bit that the hook, if you like, is the story. But you can also remember, once you know the story, you can remember the teaching principle behind it.
It's
So
sort of
yeah.
like Jack and Mark when they talk about putting all the post-it notes up on the wall. Short
Yeah.
story. But the point was is that they were really thinking about all the different ways that they could market their books, and then they were picking them off as they did them. So they had an action plan. And so the
Mm,
basic idea is have an action plan. Here's how we did it, and they tell a story. Very
mm.
simple thing. They don't take a lot of time telling that story, but it's still there. It's a story that they share, and people remember it. A lot of people remember them putting things up on the wall.
Yeah,
Um,
you can sort of visualize it, can't you? I can imagine all those
yeah,
colored post notes up.
right. And so it's an easy thing to, and it's an easier way to remember, okay, I need to have a plan. And if I can make that plan visual, it'll be so much stronger for me.
Yeah.
And if it's
Well, that's
out
good.
there on the wall, that means, bang, you see it every day. You got to do something. So,
Yeah.
build your own wall.
Yeah. Well, you got me thinking now. You got me thinking about stories that I can should be either shortening or incorporating into what I'm teaching people. So yeah.
When you're giving a talk, you can tell a long story. You can even make it 10 minutes long if you want. I
Mm,
remember seeing Jack and Mark about a year before their book came out, and Mark told one story from the book, and I had tears streaming down my eyes. I mean, I was
mm,
bawling from the
yeah.
story. It was so moving, and I knew that the book was going to sell. Just if there was one more story like that story, the book was golden.
Mm,
And they had 101 stories, so the chances of there being another one as good or almost as good was pretty good. And the sad thing for me is that I brought a free copy home that they autographed for me. My wife picks it up and reads it, and she wants to buy 10 copies. So that free book actually cost me money. You know, cost me over $100 because I had to
yeah.
buy books for her mom and her sister and her friends and family and cousins and so on. And there was word of mouth
I
without
was
them
gonna say,
spending
yeah.
money. I had to spend the money.
Yeah, that is that's the true power of word of mouth. And I expect that probably cost Jack and Victor maybe $4 or something like that, and cost you 100.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it didn't cost them anything because it was their publisher that was giving it away.
Oh, okay, even
Uh,
better. That's an infinite return on investment in that case.
yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What have you got? I mean, you've given a tons already. We've got some great notes here. Any other big needle moving things that you'd like to mention to us in the time that we got?
Well, there's two things. I mean, the internet is big, and I'll talk about that. And then TV is big. TV can sell a ton of books if you can get on. And I
Mm,
think that one of the things that you should have on your list for most authors is to get on national TV show and be very specific about what shows you want to be on and how you will make it a show. In other words, you probably don't want to be on today's show unless you really feel that that's the show you should be on.
mm,
But maybe you want to be on one of the cooking shows on the Food Network, or you want to be on one of the Travel Channel shows or something like that that really matches your book. And then you figure out a way to connect with the producer or the host of that show, and then you keep pitching them, and you pitch them forever. I mean, literally, I would send a new pitch out once a week to them until
mm.
they surrendered. You know, it's almost like stalking, but it isn't because you you don't. It's something they want. They want show ideas. They want to have a good show, and if you can help them make a good show, they're going to say yes. So back in the day when Letterman was on, he's going off soon. Um, I pitched him with the top 10 ideas that he does. I think he does at every show where he
Yeah.
does a countdown. And I gave him a countdown, and I tried to make it funny, and so that he didn't even have to do any work and have a good countdown. He didn't take the idea. It was too bad, but it was one of the ways to pitch him, because that would have been a natural for him, because he does it anyway. And if you could write in his style and catch that, it could be effective. When Johnny Carson was on the Tonight Show, the thing that I always pitched him when I pitched him was the cards that he used, the cue cards that he would toss over his shoulder and things like that. I would pitch him with cue cards. Pitch him in the way that they know. So you look, you need to, with national TV, you have to watch the show, see how they use guests, and then pitch them something that they would like. And the best way is to tie that pitch to a news story that's going on now, or to a show that they've just done recently in the last week or two, because those things are naturals for them. Follow up to shows they've already done and they know are successful is a great pitch. Pitching them a news tie-in always works, because national media are always looking for new talking heads, people that are interesting, that tell stories that can, enliven the discussion. They want you on. So if you have the right thing, they'll have you on. I mean, if you, in the past 10 years, if you had a good political book, you were either on Comedy Central shows, Jon Stewart, or something like that. They loved having authors on. If you were conservative, you were on Rush Limbaugh or Glenn Beck. Again, they love promoting books, and every one of those people could create bestsellers. It'll be interesting to see if the new Comedy Central hosts will be able to do that same thing, or even if they will have the focus on books. But that was golden. I mean, Jon Stewart pitching a book or interviewing an author was guaranteed to sell thousands of books in the next week, if the author was interesting. If the author was intensely boring,
that comes back to what we talked about earlier with stories and making sure that what you have to say is interesting and being succinct, getting it done in 2 sentences for an interview. And it very much ties together.
So national TV is a tough hit. I mean, there are a limited number of shows, and they have thousands of options for guests. But if you hit, it's golden. So that's why I think every author should spend some time targeting 1 to 5 shows that are really targeted to their audience. So many authors pitched Oprah, but back when Oprah had her show, and they had no conception of how she would use the book. The worst thing you can do to any media is send a book, because a book is going to be tossed right away if you don't have a cover letter that says, here's how you use the book. Here's why you'd be interested in me. Because no TV show, no newspaper, no magazine really wants to promote books. They want to promote ideas, things that are going to help their readers, their listeners, their viewers. You have to figure out how your book helps them. And even in fiction, you can help readers because you're entertaining them. So you gotta, and then in pitching, one of the key things in tying your book in is always to hitch your wagon to a star. And that means let the people know how your book relates to related books that are already out there, and how your book is better. And if you cannot define how your book is better than a competing book, I guarantee you that competing book is going to sell. And you're going to sell more of that competing book than your own book if you can't tell why your book is better. It doesn't matter if you're deluded about it. You just have to be passionate that your book is better.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a really good point as well, because, it comes to, we're talking about sort of tactics, mechanics and things like that here, but mindset's a really important part of this whole process, isn't it? Having that belief in your book so that you will keep going out, and because you're probably going to get a lot of rejections.
Yes, because you're going to get rejected a ton of times if you're really doing your job. And you just have to realize that their no means, no, I'm not interested. What it means is, you haven't convinced me to be interested. And that's
Mm.
why you go back to the show more times. And that's why you would go back to the magazine editors that are important to you, or the bookstores or distributors that you want to reach, or the catalogs you think that should be carrying your book, or the internet sites or the bloggers that you think should be blogging about your book. You may have to pitch them more than once. In
Mm.
fact,
It's
90%
like
of the
being a good
time you will
salesman.
have to. You have to pitch him 5, 10 times. I mean, even the typical consumer takes at least 7 impressions before they're moved to act. That's the minimum.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, that's a great quote. No means you haven't convinced me yet. I think that's something to really remember. Yeah.
And that means, you pitch them a new idea, a new angle. You don't pitch them the same old angle and just shout louder. You pitch them a new angle. You pitch
Yeah.
them, or you write a better letter, or you tell them a story. I mean, one of my favorite ways to lead a pitch letter or a news release is to tell a short story, again, in 2 to 3 sentences max. And if
Mm.
you can tell a good story in that time, you've already captured their interest. If it's something that really resonates with them, they'll read the rest of the news release or the rest of the pitch letter, and they'll probably say yes.
Yeah. And we've been talking here about national television, but would you recommend people trying to get on local and regional shows as well as a sort of stepping stone to that?
Well, I had one friend that did that, Joanna Lund. She had a book called The Healthy Exchanges Cookbook, I think, or something like that. And she became a bestseller. She sold over 10,000 copies in Iowa, which is, a state in the U.S. that
Yeah.
is in the middle of it. It doesn't have a big population, but she went on every local TV show, every local radio show. She spoke to the Kiwanis clubs and so on. She started off as a secretary in an insurance agency, but she was passionate about a book. She decided she needed to lose weight because when her son went to the Gulf War in 1990, she wanted to make sure that when he came back that she was still there, and she was a hefty woman, and she lost over 140 pounds on her diet, which was
Mm.
a Midwestern diet, not a California diet. She ate goulash and
Yeah.
other cheesy dishes and so on, but she made them heart healthy. And she sold because she was so passionate. She became the best-selling book author on QVC, home shopping channel here,
Mm.
and she just sold a ton of books. Every time she went on, she sold 5 or 10,000 more books in 5 minutes.
Yeah. That's
She
powerful.
was
Yeah.
so good at pitching. She was so good on TV because she made it visual. She would show her old pants that she used to wear.
Mm.
And she would talk about it. She would say there was no recipe in this book that doesn't pass the taste test of my truck driving husband. Now, if you know
That's great.
truck
Yeah.
drivers,
People
you
could.
know they have no taste at all, but it's still visual. It still
Yeah.
was interesting.
Exactly.
She said
Yeah.
every recipe had every ingredient in her recipes had to be available in DeWitt, Iowa, where she was from. So she was giving her address subtly by saying that. But at the same time, if it's available in DeWitt, Iowa, it's available everywhere. And that means that they didn't have any exotic ingredients. They were simple, easy to do recipes. She said, "It's if it takes more time to make than to eat, it's not in my book."
Yeah.
That means it was quick,
She knew
quick
how to market a
recipes.
book. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all visual. There were short little stories in a sense, but they were very visual, very easy to absorb. So instead of saying that the recipes are fast, she said it doesn't take longer to cook than it does to eat. Very, very visual. And that's what you need especially when you go on TV, but it also works in print publications. It works in internet interviews, Google Hangouts, Skype interviews, whatever you want to do.
Mm.
Which takes me back. I think most authors in today's world should spend 50% of their time or more marketing on the internet, because the internet allows you to reach millions of people almost for free if you
Mm.
do your job well. And that means you've got to target those websites that are already reaching your audience and are hungry
Mm.
for new content. There are very few websites in the world that don't use outside content in one way or another. I'm not talking about guest posts. I'm talking about that, a guest article or something like that, which is different, where they've invited you, they've sought you out to, do an article or do a Q&A column. I think one of the most effective things you can do is a question and answer column and become a regular columnist on a top site.
Mm.
If you're, so you look for the websites that are targeting your audience and you pitch them a Q&A column.
Yeah.
The neat thing about a Q&A column is that it's regular because it's a column. It writes itself because all you're doing is answering the questions. And if you've written a book on the subject, you should be able to answer the questions. And being you've got, you write one column a week or one column a month, and you've got immediate exposure to whatever that audience is on that particular website. And, so that becomes very easily, quickly becomes a very major thing. Like if I was writing for women, the first website I would probably target is popsugar.com. Well, I think it's one of the top 1,000 or 2,000 websites in the world, has millions and millions of visitors, and it's all about giving practical advice to women. And they have things on health, diet, decorating, crafts, beauty, almost any topic, food, they've got subsections for all those categories, relationships and so on. So if you have a book on any of those subjects, Pop Sugar is where you need to be. And if you can do a Q&A column for them, you're golden.
Yeah. And everybody, if you're listening to this, there's going to be a website out there that fits whatever you're doing, both fiction and nonfiction. And just
Right.
John, going back to what you were saying earlier about, I'm just going to written down the quote. No just means you haven't convinced me yet. And, it may mean that you go back and pitch multiple times and try different angles and tweak it. And, but, before you pitch it all, right, really get clear on what it is that website is giving to their audience, what it is they want, so that you can align yourself with that. And
right, it's just like TV shows.
Yeah,
it's just like TV shows, or you have to really know that site. If it's important to you, if it's high traffic and very targeted to your audience, you really need to study that site and figure out where you can fit in. Because let's say you wrote a book on fitness, and like Pop Sugar has a subsection called Fit Sugar. They have probably 100 columnists now, but there's an angle you can use to get in and say, I know you've got 3 people writing about this and 5 people showing people how to do exercises and so on. But what I can do is tell, nearly women who have just given birth how to lose their weight. I don't know if they have somebody that's writing about that, but you could focus in on that and do a Q&A column just for people who have pregnant women or for women who have just given birth and they want to lose that birth weight. What a wonderful targeted audience Fit Sugar would be for you. If you can fit in there. Now, it may be, your book may not be about that subject. It may be about just general fitness, but I guarantee you, once you start writing that column for Fit Sugar, you're going to be writing a book about being fit when you're pregnant and after giving birth, because you will be the expert.
Yeah, you're creating the content as you go. Yeah.
Yeah, the wonderful thing is that as you write more and more for, or be interviewed for websites, you're going to be writing new books, very simply. But you got to understand how the website uses content. If it's a blogger and they don't do guest posts, but they do book reviews, then you pitch the book review. If they love doing interviews, or they love doing Google Hangouts, or they do podcasts, pitch that. And again, pitch it upon something they've done recently. Don't, pitch blindly. Pitch based on what they've done just in the last minute, or pitch again the news angle that works for the internet sites just as it does for TV or radio or magazines or anywhere else. They want people that can give them good content, good current content.
And
your
can I
job
just add
is
something, John?
Match that.
I just want to add something there. As a podcaster myself, and as somebody, because I'm sort of tuned into the podcasting community, and through social media and stuff like that, and I know sometimes people think, well, why would they want to hear about me? But there's a lot of podcasters out there, a lot of bloggers, a lot of people out there who need content, and actually be very grateful to hear from you if your stuff is relevant to them. It's nice to have somebody pitch you in a clear way with a, here are the benefits. This is why it would work for your audience if it's a genuine fit. And so, don't be afraid to pitch people, because if you've got a regular show and you're a podcaster, there's a lot of work involved in getting all the guests lined up. So don't be afraid to go out there and ask people, can I be a guest on your show? I think this is why it would be a good fit.
Right. And again, it's that good fit. It has to be something that works for them. And the thing is that, you can still do the same thing. Say you're writing a novel or doing poetry. There are a lot of websites out there that would love to interview you to find out about your writing process. Or find out, they want to know more about your characters. How did you develop those characters? So if you've got, say, a romance novel, there are probably at least 1,000 romance bloggers out there, people that are passionate about reading romances. And, some of them have, big audiences, maybe as many as 100,000. A lot of them maybe only have small audiences of 100. But, if you pitch, if you develop, put together a spreadsheet or an email list and just continually pitching to that same list.
Yeah.
You can easily use something like MailChimp, which allows you 1,000 free emails. So you could develop separate lists for different audiences that you want to do. Now, the one key thing is you have to use an email service that allows you to add names to the list. And I don't know if MailChimp allows you to do that. But there are some services out there that will do it. Otherwise, you do it, develop the list yourself, and do a blind group email or something like that.
Yeah.
But
well, I use GetResponse. I know they allow you to add emails, providing, of course, you follow the terms. You're not spamming people, and people can opt out. But that's built into the system.
But because when you're pitching, let's say, the bloggers, there are, for example, again, if you have a topic for women or especially for mothers, there are 2,000 mommy bloggers out there, at least, because almost every woman that decides to stay at home for a while and raises her children writes a blog. And a lot of them don't like being called mommy bloggers, so I apologize for those who do, but they're bloggers, mothers who are staying at home and blogging and hoping to build income that way so they can continue to stay at home and raise their children. And a significant number of them have fairly large audiences and are making a living at blogging. And, that's really neat. But they're also, the neat thing about bloggers is that they tend to be passionate about what they're blogging about. Yeah. So if you can get, pitch them something that's worthwhile, you'll find that they'll jump on it. And even a fiction author could possibly write about it, because let's say their romance novel features, a woman, that is single at the time, but she finds romance, and there's something about the whole thing about building relationships or finding a worthwhile romance or relationship that you could talk about because you had to write about it in your novel.
Yeah.
Just as if you write science fiction, you could talk about science developments. So you could hit all the science websites and bloggers. So there's lots of opportunity. One of the complaints I keep getting from people is that they'll say 1,001 Ways isn't for fiction authors. And I'm going, what do you mean? I kept talking about fiction, and how to market fiction. And they're still saying it's impossible. And I'm going, you didn't read the book, because the number of times that I talk about how you market novels was incredible in that book, because I kept thinking about it, because I didn't want to just pitch the nonfiction writers. I really wanted to help poets and novelists as well. So I really do write about it. But novelists sometimes get stuck in thinking that the only way to market a novel is to have a big publisher and do a book tour. Well, there are 10 authors in the world that get that kind of treatment, maybe 20, maybe as many as 100, but it's not you until you get better known.
Yeah.
But, getting interviewed on a Google Hangout or Skype or podcast, that's possible. It's very possible. You just have to find the angle to make it interesting. I'm amazed by how many people send me a book or send me an email, and they assume that I'm going to figure out how to pitch their book. Now, I'm smart, I'm smarter than most media people, so I can do that. But if somebody's already done it for me, I'm going to use it much more quickly than if I have to invent the way. And that means that there's a good chance that even if I love your book, I'll never get to it because there were so many other easy, done-for-me things that I can already feature. Which am I going to choose? I'm going to choose the easy and done-for-me if it's as good as what you have or what I would create for you. And it's just that simple. We have so much time in the world, and we want to use it wisely. So, it just amazes me how many people think that sending out one news release and they're done, and then they cry because nobody followed up. They got no response, and they're going, the book is a failure. The book isn't a failure. The author is the failure, and only because they didn't do the follow-up, the follow-up, the follow-up to get people excited about their book. And that's what you really need to do. And, it's that. And then the key thing that I always teach people is you need to create relationships. When you're pitching TV shows, you're pitching magazine editors, pitching bloggers or podcasters, you're always looking to create a relationship with them. So you're not trying to shove something down their throat. You're trying to help them. You're trying to give them some good content that they can use that will be of value to the people that read them, listen to them, or watch them. And if you can do that, you create a relationship. I mean, I know when I was regularly doing radio interviews, there were a couple radio hosts that loved me so much that they had me on once a month. I didn't have to call them. I didn't have to do anything. I did a good job. I created good content for them. I created a good show for them, and they came back to me again and again because they knew I could give them a good show. And, it's the same for podcasters. There's podcasters that I've seen interview the same people again and again because they give them a good interview. And that's all that really matters is they want good content. They also want variety, so they're not always going to have you on, but they will have you on enough times because they know you're going to give them good content. The one reason that you might want to hire a book publicist to publicize your book is because they've already built those relationships with the media, and the media trusts them to give them good guests. But the thing is, you can replicate that by just simply working to create the relationship yourself, especially with the 5 or 10 key media that would be really important to you, whether it's national TV or good magazines, or again, things on the internet. You can create those contents or, those relationships, or you can hire somebody who already has those relationships. But the people that already have those relationships, they're expensive.
I mean, I would say
with just a little bit of time, you can replicate them. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that, coming back to that persistence thing, it's easy with social media and email and all these tools we have now. It's in one sense, it's easier than ever to build relationships with people. We're 7 time zones apart, and but we're chatting live here on Google Hangouts. On the other hand, there's more noise, more traffic, and more people competing. But here's the thing, whether it's getting onto media, whether it's selling a book, whether it's selling a product, most people don't keep going. They quit too soon. And it takes not always, but typically it will take multiple points of contact. We talked about this earlier to build that trust and build that relationship, build the rapport so that somebody will either buy your book or be happy to have you on the show. And so, if you're listening to this, again, it's so key. And it's great that John's talked about this a lot, because it is so crucial, is that persistence and building that relationship and alignment and how can I add value to this person and how can I add value to their audience, because that's what's going to get you the coverage that you need.
Well, now you've summarized everything I talked about.
Well,
And
John, I
very succinctly. That was good. I like
thank you.
that. And that's the key, and it's just like, I think one of the best ways to market a book on the internet is to do a podcast and interview people, other people who are famous in your discipline. And it's like you got Jack on.
Hmm.
Jack Canfield said yes. He's famous. A lot of people would say, well, he'd never talk to me. How do I reach him? And then they don't go through the process of figuring out a way to get in contact with him.
Yeah.
Things like that. And the thing is that it's possible. You just have to work it. And you know, if I were launching a new section, let's say, one of the things I've become, because of what I've done on Pinterest, I've become a fitness expert. You won't know that by looking at me, but I share fitness ideas and fitness inspiration. So one of the books I'm going to write at some point is how to be fit in 10 minutes a day, kind of thing, something like
Yeah.
that. And that's going to be, I don't have the media relationships. I don't have the website relationships for that category. So I'll have to start to build them. And,
Mm.
so I will start aiming for some of the top websites like fitsugar.com, which is a
Mhm.
subdivision of Pop Sugar, and build a relationship with them. And one of the key ways to do that is by doing a podcast. And then I'd invite some of the people. I'd invite everybody that blogged for Fit Sugar. I'd invite them all to be on my podcast because
Yeah.
I build a relationship with all of those, and somewhere along the line, Pop Sugar is going to find out about me from them, because the chances
Mm.
are that if I invite them and we have a great conversation, one, they might feature me on their blog. Two, they might share the podcast with all their readers, and boom, I'm in Pop Sugar. Three, they might do a podcast, invite me to be on their podcast or their Google Hangout or something like that. And so there's multiple reasons why. Plus, they may invite me back. There's so many
Yeah.
reasons why doing a podcast can be so effective, because in doing a podcast, you're building a relationship. You ask good questions, you interact well with your guest, they're going to love it and they're going to share it. I mean,
Yeah.
I've just had so much fun on this podcast, this Google Hangout, and I've shared such wonderful content. I'm not being biased here.
Yeah.
I
No,
just
you
know
have
that
definitely.
this has been a good session, a lot
Mm.
of good content. So I'm going to share it with all my people. So automatically, you have exposure that you wouldn't have had if you hadn't interviewed me. And that's
Yeah.
really the power of doing Google Hangouts or podcasts
Mm.
or something like that. It can be very, very
Yeah.
powerful in terms of building relationships over and beyond whatever exposure that your guests might get. The
Mm.
exposure you get will be multiplied. I mean, you actually benefit from this podcast more than I will. This Google Hangout.
Yeah.
You're selfish.
Well, I'll be doing it. I'll do as much as I can to recommend you as well, because I mean, you have given absolutely tremendous content here. So, John, I want to be obviously mindful of your time here. Um, I mean, you've given us a ton, and I think if you're listening to this, you could just take what we've talked about, what John's talked about in the last hour, and there's enough information there to create a fantastic bestseller just from that. So, John, before we round things out, tell everyone how they can follow up with you. What's your website, and how can they find out more?
Well, my key active website now is bookmarketingbestsellers.com. My legacy website is bookmarket.com. And the one reason I'm not doing as much on it is that it's not mobile friendly. It's built
Okay.
upon, HTML pages. And so, redesigning it for mobile would take months of time,
Mm.
or either that, or I guess I could hire a virtual assistant to do it. And maybe I should. Because in today's world, one of the things I just shared on my blog there is how important mobile is becoming. Amazon, Google, Facebook, let's see what other, Pinterest, over 50% of their traffic is coming from mobile phones right now, mobile phones
Mm,
and tablets. And that means if your website isn't mobile friendly, people won't stay on it for sure.
yeah.
And they may never come back because it's
Mm,
too hard to use. So,
hmm.
my book marketing bestsellers website is based in WordPress, and it's on a mobile responsive web theme. So that means it will adjust to any size screen. And that's one way that you create something that's mobile friendly. And so, I have some clients that they refuse to switch because they like their site, they think it's beautiful. And
Yeah.
I'm going, but you're losing 50 to
Yeah.
60% of your potential audience
I I
today.
mean,
I'm not
we
talking
crossed.
about
Yeah.
80%, it's projected to be in 5 years. And
Yeah.
just, I think it's today or tomorrow, Google is going to be giving you demerits if you don't
Yes.
have a mobile friendly website. And that
Mm,
means you're not going to show up where you did before. My
yeah.
bookmarket.com website, if you search for book marketing, was always number one in Google. It's going to drop like a stone in the next week.
Yeah. You better get that
And
virtual
so, yeah, I
assistant.
guess I'm going to have
Start
to do that
bringing
because
it across.
I simply don't have the time to do it. And it
I mean,
has to
that's
be done because in
yeah.
today's world, it matters.
Yeah, and I mean, I know we're sort of summing up here and giving people a chance to catch up with you, but you've just given us another huge marketing tip. And I think that crossover,
Yeah,
depending on which stats you listen to, where more people, the point where more people were viewing on mobile than desktop, say, uh, that was a year, maybe 2 years ago, and it's only getting more and more in terms of mobile
it
being a
is. And
huge
the thing
market share.
is that the people who are buying through mobile is increasing exponentially. I mean, more and more people are choosing to buy using their tablet than their computer.
Mm,
And it's still interesting. More people will browse with their smartphone, but they will go to their tablet to buy. I think
that
that's
is interesting.
interesting. That's
Yeah.
It's a stat that I came across when I was doing that post last night, and it's interesting. So, you have to think in terms of being mobile friendly, smartphone, tablet size, even computer size. But somewhere along the line, computers for most people are going to be passe. And certainly in the world as a whole, most people do not have computers, but I think it's right now something like 5.3 billion people have access to a smartphone.
Mm. I mean, that's a good point as well. Is there are going to be millions and millions of people coming online for the first time, never having had a laptop or a desktop. They'll go straight to tablet or straight to smartphone. So it
Right.
is, things change rapidly. So
Well, when
yeah,
I
thank you
was
for that.
about a year ago, I was speaking in Singapore, and riding the buses and things like that.
Mm,
Everybody had an iPad. I mean, it was ubiquitous. I mean, everybody
yeah,
had them, and they were carrying them with them. And that's just in one little city state. And the thing
yeah,
is that that's happening more and more. I remember when I was in England riding the trains, and everybody had a mobile phone. Back, in my day when I was growing up, we were on the train, nobody could reach us. Now, I was sitting on the train and people were talking all around me, but they were talking into space because they were
yeah,
talking to somebody on their mobile phone,
yeah,
or accessing the internet nowadays. I mean, as you said, back when you were writing the bus and the Da Vinci Code, now you would not see the book cover because the person's probably reading it uh, with their Amazon reader or the iPad or their
yeah,
smartphone,
hmm,
and they're still
yeah,
reading books, but it's done a different way.
yeah. Cool. Good. So, John, I just
So
want to finish up.
we should end now, but the one way
Yeah,
I want to finish off is the key thing is think of every new book you do as a 3-year project in terms of marketing.
a 3-year project, did you say?
And a 3-year, yeah, you should really
Yeah.
do something every day for that book for at least 3 years. But that means you do 3 to 5 things a day. Excuse me. and you take time off for good behavior.
Yeah,
But those 3 things to 5 things could be sending an email, posting something on a social media, doing a blog post, making a phone call to connect with somebody,
mm,
doing a Google Hangout. There's lots of things you can do in a very short period of time to make
yeah,
things happen. Now, in this interview, I think, what have we gone? Maybe an hour? Uh,
yeah. We're about an hour and 20 minutes, I think now. Maybe
okay.
an hour and 15.
So that's more time than I normally spend every day marketing. But it was fun, so I don't mind. To me, it's
Yeah,
not work, it's play. And when you start to think of marketing that way, it's a whole different thing. And when you think of creating relationships as making friends, it becomes a whole new game as well.
mm,
And you really should, because I have a lot of friends that I've built relationships with, people that I still haven't met in person, but I built
yeah,
relationships through email and so on. I haven't met you yet in person. Someday, probably we will.
yeah.
But in the meantime, we have a relationship, and it'll be an ongoing relationship. I don't think we're going to give up on each other.
That's
I
right.
like you. I think you like me. I gave you some good content, blah, 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 and that's part of it. So there are 2 key things there. Have fun in marketing, just, do the things that you enjoy doing that produce results, and make friends. If you remember those
Yeah,
2 things, then don't forget everything else, but you won't, because I've been telling you stories. Uh, you
yeah,
will do well in marketing. And the key
yeah,
thing is, if you love your book, it's not hard to talk about it. If you love your subject, if you love the novel that you wrote and you love your characters, you can talk about it for an hour yourself.
mm,
Quite honestly, I've done 3-day seminars without notes, because I'm
yeah,
passionate and I'm knowledgeable about what I talk about. So I can fill up 3 days worth of seminars. So, what we've done in an hour and 20 minutes is a lot. I gave you an incredible amount of content, and more
yeah,
than I thought I would. But, I have a lot more to share, and that's the key. You can share a lot, but if you really know your subject, there's so much more you can do. And,
yeah,
I continue to learn every day. I read other people's books on marketing. I follow people, their blogs and so on, because I want to learn. I want to continue to learn. And
mm.
I think that's, for me, it's fun. I'm at retirement age, so, I could retire, but I'm having too much fun.
Well, that's
And
how it
my
should be.
wife doesn't want me. My wife doesn't want me to retire, because she wants me out of the house.
Well, we call it a win-win.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Fantastic.
So
Well,
thanks, John, for having me on. It
yeah,
was a lot of fun.
yeah. And thank you, John. I mean, thanks for being a guest, first of all. And thank you for tremendous, tremendous content. I mean, you've shared tons with us. And please, please go check out John's website, bookmarketingbestsellers.com,
And follow
bookmarking.
me on Twitter,
Yes.
twitter.com/John Kremer, Kremer. And Facebook, same. I'd be happy to have a relationship with you. I follow every book author that follows me. As long as I know you're a book author, make sure you say something about your book in your Twitter profile, on your Facebook profile, so that I know who I'm connecting with. Because there are a lot of spammers in the world, but I will follow every book author that I know is a book author. On
Yeah.
Twitter, on Facebook, on Pinterest, wherever you are, if you follow me, I will follow you if I know that you're a book author.
We need to
I will
stick together.
also follow you if I think you're interesting.
Yeah.
So if you're not a book author, but you're interesting, you're guaranteed follow right here. I'm a fan.
Awesome. Well, John, yeah, huge, huge thank you.
I
It's been
got
an
to
absolute
stop though.
pleasure. So we'll definitely keep in touch. It's been tremendous fun.
Yes.
Thanks, John.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers. Bye bye.